Welcome back, guys. I am Follygon, and this is day 21 of Sculptober. Today's prompt is fresh, and who better to make than the Fresh Prince himself. But before we get in and talk about the process, if you are new around here, click that subscribe button. And if you'd like to download some stuff like my brushes or materials, check out gumroad.com/Follygon. Starting off by getting in all the major landmarks, when I am creating a character's head, the very first thing that I focus on is separating the back side of the head from the front plane of the face. After you get that, the next most important thing to get in are your bony landmarks. That often means getting in a nice sharp line for that jawline so you can figure out where that is, as well as the brow, an area for the nose, and just kind of marking up a couple easy landmarks like the mouth or essentially where you're going to place in the eyes. I'm moving pretty quick and dirty through all of this, so I've already started to sculpt in a quick nose and mouth, and a little bit of an area for the eyes. We're gonna be simplifying those this time around. You can see me going through with things like pinch and trim to block out the areas where the planes change. Blocking out and getting hard plane changes is even more important when you are creating softer forms. I know it sounds maybe a little backwards, but it's actually true. The reason for that is because soft shapes are really hard to figure out exactly what they look like. Which sounds maybe a little weird or maybe a little silly if you don't do a lot of sculpting, but I promise it's true. I struggle with it all the time. So a way to make that easier is to make the shape blocked out or kind of have these hard plane changes at first, and then after you figure out the shape a little bit better, you can go through and soften it up. So you'll see up by the brow line, I have this really sharp line going across the face, and that is to make sure that that is where it needs to be. And it's also to make sure that the plane change from the front of the forehead is turning down into the eye socket properly. The same thing is true for planing out the area for the front of the face and the side of the face. You can see a lot of those hard lines pretty much everywhere. You can see some of that stuff around the bottom of the mouth. I soften up a lot of those forms later, but that's just a nice tip for you guys if you are struggling with the softer organic forms. From here, we are adding on some quick color with ZBrush's Poly Paint, which is essentially vertex color. It does not require a texture map, but you can convert it to a texture map later on if you want. My process for painting skin is very simple, especially on a cartoon character like this. You start with a basic skin tone, which at first is most likely not going to be exactly where you want it. You fill that in at 100%, and then you start adjusting just minor percentage clicks into a darker or lighter spectrum or a more saturated or less saturated spectrum, and of course adjusting the hue as you go. Specifically here, I get some warmer areas around areas like the cheek and the nose and of course the lips, some darker areas around the eye cavity, and some lighter areas around some of the more bony landmarked areas like the chin or the brow ridge. And then after that, I neutralize it back just a little bit to make it all blend and feel a bit more cohesive. While I'm doing this, I will continue to sculpt on the character and refine it. As you start to get color on your character, I feel like proportions become a little bit easier to distinguish and figure out, so I recommend that quite often. And it also helps you to realize things that you're missing, like in this case, some quick eyebrows. Eyebrows are a very expressive part of the face, and when you are missing those, your face can feel pretty awkward. Same thing goes for eyelashes, but this style is so simplistic that I'm not creating things like eyelids or eyelashes. Moving forward to work on the hair, this process is a relatively simple one. I've talked about it many times, and for this hairstyle, all it requires is duplicating my mesh and then using the geometry that I already have to extract that form into the basic primitive shape of my hair. So you can see that I'm actually going to create two separate sections for the hair, one for the top and then one for the shorter side portion of the hair. For that, I am just using some dynamic new features in ZBrush 2021 called Dynamic Thickness. What's really nice about the Dynamic Thickness slider is that it extrudes, well, dynamically, so you can kind of preview your thickness that way, and it makes for a little bit of a better extraction process for adding thickness to a piece of geometry. What's really nice about that as well is that it adds that thickness in the positive and negative direction of the normal, which is a fancy way of saying it'll make sure that your geometry is not floating on top of your head for your hair. I fill these in as placeholders for now with just some simple poly paint, but later on I'll be adding a little bit of texture to those with noise, and we'll be able to make those a bit more visually distinct. Then on to the neck and body. These are just some simple pieces of geometry created with spheres that I pull out into a quick shape for the general form of a torso and neck. Nothing anatomically perfect, especially with this style. That would be pretty awkward going from a head like what we have on screen to a very realistic torso. So I keep that fairly low poly, doing things like dynameshing and z-remeshing to get that a bit more simple, and then I clean that up with tools like smooth and trim to get the form where I need it. The mustache is created using the exact same technique that I used on the hair, using some selection tools to get the basic shape that I need on top of the lip, remeshing that geometry, and then adding some dynamic thickness to the form. From there, a little bit of cleanup as you start to get more pieces on your character, things like eyes, ears, noses, etc. Noses, maybe one nose, but as you start to get those pieces in, you will notice things that feel a little bit off more and more. Part of that is that you are just spending more time with your character, it's starting to develop more, and the other part is that you are getting closer to the finished piece by having more parts that you can reference against the other pieces. So as I personally get closer to that point, I like to combine a lot of my pieces of geometry that were separated up to this stage. So that includes things like the head, the neck, the body, and the ears, which were separate meshes, but are now simply combined very quickly using Dynamesh. That's a quick additive Boolean operation that I can use to combine those into one solid piece, and then I use things like z-remesher to simplify my form and clean up any dirty edges. The same process for the hair that I used to extract that is actually the exact same process that I use here for the clothing. A simple duplication of my body and inflating the duplicated mesh just a little bit to represent the shirt. And then using the slice curve brush to create some very sexy 90s clothing patterns here. A lot of the shirts from this era were blinding, to say the least. Some quick adjustments to the collar around the neck to get that to feel like it's syncing up with the shirt a little bit better. And then I separate the different segments of the shirt into separate meshes temporarily so that I can fill in the poly paint there a little bit more accurately. As they are connected, because poly paint is technically vertex color, some of those colors will bleed from one area to the other. And I wanted that to be a bit more clean, so I do some adjusting to get those a bit closer to the desired effect. The final thing here before breaking symmetry is going to be a quick earring. This is probably one of the quickest little pieces of geometry I've ever created. I used a sphere, a trim brush, and I created some faceted edges for the shape of the sphere, and tapered the bottom to essentially form it into the basic shape of a diamond. Then I used Decimation Master to lower the poly count and get it into something that felt a bit more faceted even still. Very simple, very quick, very messy, but because it's so small, it doesn't really matter. The final stage here is going to be asymmetry. For this, I quickly hop into Transpose Master, adjust the angle of the entire character to offset it from the central axis, start rotating the neck. Anytime you do any kind of rotation on an organic form, you are going to mess it up a little bit, so the neck gets a little bit noodly there, so I need to adjust it after the fact. And then go through the face and start giving him a slight expression, making him feel a little bit more happy, as well as getting the lines of the lips to line up a little bit better. It was starting to get a bit crazy through there, a bit messy through some areas of the face as well around the brow, so just some final kind of stages of cleanup here at the end. As well as more tweaks to that neck, as I'm noticing from a few specific angles, it was feeling a bit broken. I do a little bit more deleting for some specific pieces of geometry just to make things a little bit more clean. And then the very final step here is going to be combining the two sections of hair that I've created. After combining them, I z-remesh them to simplify the geometry, get some subdivs in there so that I can create a nice simple gradient between the two pieces of geometry to fade in the color from top to bottom. And then I hop over into ZBrush's Noise Maker down in the surface menu to begin making the bottom section have a bit smaller noise to push closer to the skin tone. That helped to make it feel a bit more like extremely short hair on the scalp. And then for the top section, I do the exact same thing, but I make it much larger and much stronger. and then some very simple adjustments to make sure that things are lining up properly with the move brush, and then some very small tweaks to color for the hair. I had a lot of fun working on this one. It took me a little bit less than an hour to complete. If you are new around here, click that subscribe button. And if you want to learn how to make some fun characters just like this one, check out gumroad.com/Follygon. There you can find things like my courses, my brushes, and my materials. Thanks for watching again, guys. You have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in tomorrow's video with the prompt point.